morning, everybody. Welcome to the Governor's monthly press conference for today, Wednesday, the 25th of January. Governor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Just by way of opening, I want to confirm the press release that we put out yesterday, which is that the royal visit will happen on the 2nd of March, Friday the 2nd of March. It will be Prince and Princess Edward, the Earl and Countess of Wessex. Prince Edward is the Queen's youngest son. They will be here for the day on the Friday, arriving by boat relatively early in the morning, and then leaving that evening. It's part of it's part of the commitment to visit by the Queen and her family to visit all the realms and most of the Commonwealth during the Diamond Jubilee year. The programme hasn't been finalised yet, but it's probably will include an investiture, visits to the MVO, a reception, visits the opening of the museum, and one or two other events. But we will send out details of the finalised programme nearer the time. That's all I want to say by way of introduction. Of course, the Premier, who we would normally hope to do a joint press conference with, is in Brussels this week. I've also asked Kato Kimbugwe and Marc Turner to be here to answer questions, particularly on DFID business, if there are detailed questions on that. But I'm also available to answer any questions that you think are appropriate. So over to you.
Who wants to go first?
Governor Davis, since I know this is where Bennett is going to go, I wanted to get your opinion as head of the local civil service on the budget proposal that was presented and how confident you are that it will be refined to fit where we need to go.
Well, I don't really want to comment on the figures because they haven't been finalised. What I do want to say is I've just come from the third of meetings that myself and the Deputy Governor are having with all government departments, roughly at Assistant Secretary level and above. So we've had 3 meetings. There are 12 scheduled, which is to talk about various principles of the public service, the need for flexibility, the need for proportionality, the need to have appropriate performance management systems in place, to discuss with them how we reward good performance and have sanctions against poor performance. So the whole gamut of public sector and the need for the public sector to be flexible in times of economic stringency are areas that we're addressing. So it's a kind of counterpart to the financial figures. It's a question of attitudes, how the public sector is set up to deliver, how they do in fact deliver the various policies that we have decided in Cabinet. Detailed questions on the budget and the aid memoir, of which we've just seen a draft, had better addressed to the DFID programme representative. But I'm quite happy to talk more about these meetings I'm having with the public sector.
Okay, another question in relation to these meetings is, over the last 2 years or so, there was intensive work done on a performance management program, implementing it. Well, what definitely wasn't clear were what would be the benefits of it and what would happen if people weren't meeting those standards. Are we going to go further now and have it very explicit what will be the results of that? Because I think that was one of the reasons why we haven't seen any success, is that there was no motivation because I wasn't being punished if I didn't meet what was said in those plans.
The phrase I've heard, which I kind of paraphrase, but the phrase I've heard most consistently in the first 3 meetings is, there are no consequences. That is correct. There doesn't seem to be any consequences of good behaviour or bad behaviour. We do need to address that. Once I've gone through all the meetings, myself and the Deputy Governor will come up with some suggestions, particularly on performance management, but more generally from what we've heard, which we'll put in a paper to Cabinet for conclusions and discussions. But you're right, a performance management system, well, a performance management system that doesn't build in some kind of benefits and some kind of sanctions probably doesn't really work. And we need to establish something rather more meaningful. We also need to make sure that the performance management system is being complied with, so we have evidence of what's going on, who is performing well, who's not performing so well. And at the moment, I think we're at about a 50% compliance rate, and that needs to go up.
Good morning, Bennett Roach. Nerissa prefaced, of course, what we would like to be talking about, and I really appreciate the vision, if you like, or the anticipation that we would be talking about budget issues, so that we have both Marc and especially Mr. Kimbugwe. So welcome to this conference.
Thank you.
And to follow up from where Nerissa was, I was hoping that you would somehow preface me in your answer. It's not just 2 years we are going with this whole reform, public service reform, and so on and so on and so on. I remember maybe more than 2 years ago, I was invited to an ethics discourse, public forum. Haven't heard another word. A lot of things were said at that meeting. I don't think it scared people away, but nothing has happened. I am more concerned with coming to the present right now. I love to look back because I feel that we don't look back, then we won't know what we're doing, and maybe that's why we don't get anywhere. Just recently, I asked the Premier, because he had been talking about the inefficiencies and the incompetence even of the public service. And we all know the problems of why we are where we are to some extent after the last 15 years. But we thought that from 2000, we should have been a lot further ahead than we are. The Premier had said just recently, in direct connection with the budget talks and preparations rather, that the civil servants were on board and turning around the corner. I have to express my grave disappointment at this almost history-making situation, that difficult position they are taking. While we were here asking difficult questions, the Premier was making some comments, which I later heard in the House, which were diametrically opposed to what David was really saying. My real concern is, we talk about, you said that you are going to be getting towards where people can be punished, is the word used. Great, or rewarded, because the Premier does say sometimes, yes, some of them who are good. So I'd like to put a little more teeth into what is happening there. I'm not interested in the punishment. The punishment I would like to see is where they actually cause cause loss, not just loss, but loss, yes, where by their wrongdoings, omissions or whatever, it costs the country money. Actually taking money that you hardly have and putting it up. I'm concerned about that. You will see that, Nerissa sees that, we all see that. Where exactly is the problem, and will we put our finger on that problem and fix that problem? Not just the overall thing, but there must be a source for the problem, that nothing happens.
I don't know, because I've only done a quarter of the meetings, I don't really have my finger on the pulse, but if I were to characterize it in one way, I would say that I suspect there is too much thought of individuals rather than team. So that although actually some public servants really do operate as a team, they have to, but others, I suspect, do not buy in to the team ethos. And we need a team ethos because we're in a collective endeavour. Some people said at my first few meetings they didn't know what the vision was. So if they didn't know what the vision was, how could they really pursue it? And I said, well, the vision is very clear. Both the Premier and myself are absolutely clear that the priority is to get economic growth and development going again in Montserrat, to move Montserrat closer towards the path of financial independence. And by doing that, one of the ways to do that is to encourage people to return to Montserrat because the current population is unsustainable. but with the knowledge that they will only come back if there are worthwhile opportunities for them to pursue. So I want the public sector to think of themselves as a team pursuing collectively that vision. And I also agree with you that it isn't all criticism. There's a lot of praise that can be given, and everything should be measured. But we want to take stock at this point. We're going to have a Public Service Act soon. We're rewriting the general orders and regulations. Sounds boring, but it's essential. That's going to come to Cabinet soon. This is a good opportunity to take stock. There is a whole area of public sector reform which DFID has been supporting the Government of Montserrat in for the last few years, and we need to start showing some results from that. But above all, I want people to know that the ultimate objective is economic development for Montserrat. And they should look at all their activities in that light. How does this promote economic development? If it doesn't, should we be doing it? The answer is, in my view, no.
Let me take you to something in the budget, and it's still to do with the public service. The reduction in domestic revenue has been accommodated by the Government of Montserrat by constraining with expenditure. This has largely come from unfilled vacancies across the civil service and efforts by accounting officers to constrain expenditure. The restraint is commendable. I asked DFID about that statement. Doesn't that pose a big problem? And in their response to me, they used the word key posts. If we are not putting people into key posts, but by not filling those positions, supposedly save money. But by not filling those key posts, aren't we exacerbating the problem? Management of the public service.
Sorry, I think if you read it, it doesn't say key posts. It says posts.
Not if I read it. It's what he said when he questioned him about it.
But what we're talking about in this instance, and I'll just pass on to Kato to explain what DFID is considering offering in terms of long-term TC support, technical cooperation support. What we were referring to was the fact that vacancies haven't been filled. A lot of vacancies have been vacant for some time, and so we're looking at whether you actually need vacancies. But for example, I got a proposal about 3 or 4 months ago for the Department of Health, Ministry of Health, to employ another doctor. And I said, you can't employ another doctor, although it's a key post, unless you can find savings from within your budget. I mean, because it was my responsibility to put the paper to Cabinet. First of all, they said it was impossible to do so, and then when I insisted, they did find savings by efficiencies. So I think it can happen. I don't think we're talking, if a key post is a key post, then it's a key post and we shouldn't leave it unfilled. That's kind of almost a definitional situation. But can I pass on to Kato to talk about, well, whatever you want to say on the budget and aid memoir, but also particularly the long-term proposals for technical assistance?
Thank you very much. I think, just to respond to your question, in particular the quote in the aid memoir, what we refer to as unfilled vacancies, these are some vacancies that have gone unfilled for, let's say, 2-3 years. So it's not just something that happened during this financial year. And I'll give you some examples. So, for example, the chief surveyor position has gone unfilled until we recently got VSO, who came in to support the survey department, but ended up being appointed as a chief surveyor at the moment. And then you talk about the quantity surveyor post in PWD, which has been unfilled for a long time. Structural engineering post, we had a lady here who was working with, who came along because her partner was working on the PDP dream, and she filled that position for only a 6-month period. So what has actually happened, there are some posts within Government of Montserrat where the government has found it difficult to attract people to fill those posts, both regionally, maybe because of the salary scales, but also because very many people in the region don't tend to see Montserrat as their first option. Given in these significant positions, there is a lot of work out there and they're in demand. So if Montserrat wants to attract them, they would have to pay a significant premium, and that's within the constraints of the existing budget. So one of the answers, in particular when you say this is a critical problem, if you look at the strategic growth plan, the infrastructure that is supposed to be going in to facilitate growth, these are key positions, just the three that are picked out, that need to be filled. So what we've discussed with Government of Montserrat this week is to try and implement a TC budget that will support Government of Montserrat in trying to fill these critical key posts that are vital for, one, the implementation of the strategic growth plan, but also, two, in ensuring that Government of Montserrat has the capacity in-house, within the government itself, to be able to deliver on this whole range of options that they've outlined in terms of their policy in the policy framework that they've got. So it's not that we have not identified this as a problem and we're not doing anything about it. I think we're working with Governor Montserrat together with the governor to ensure that over the next 1 year, when we agree the final budget settlement for Montserrat, those key posts are catered for by DFID providing additional funding so those posts can be filled.
For well over a year, we've been hearing about the reduction in the public service. So, is there any correlation with the on-field posts and that thought or that idea?
Okay, when we look at whenever we have these budget discussions and we look at the total staffing numbers in Government of Montserrat, normally the figures they give us include these key vacancies that haven't been filled, because it makes no sense whatsoever for them to give us a lower figure and then say, we're not going to reduce, we're trying to reduce staff numbers across the board, and yet those critical posts have to be filled. So the figures that we get from them, I think roughly about 900 and something, include those unfilled vacancies. Now, there is a process of rationalization that the HR department is currently undertaking with every government department, functional analysis and rationalization, to look at whether or not do you really still need to fill that post, or can you reassign individuals within other government departments to come in and fill some of those positions. We know the key strategic ones will still need to be filled, but is there a case for either getting rid of that vacancy completely and either using technology or adopting better ways of doing things that would then allow you to essentially not have to fill that post and let that go?
To follow up, this falls right within your thing. The whole thing about taking people away from the public service and throwing them out into the private sector, into a private sector that is not functioning, for really want of a real hard way to describe it, brings me to the question, what real efforts are made? Because until you really have that private sector functioning and saying, yes, we can take people to aid us in shaking along the programs, how are we progressing on that?
Okay, and I think Adrian will help with that as well. But I think we had this discussion last week where I accept that when it comes to this rationalization exercise within Government of Montserrat, it's really difficult for you to have any sort of redundancy plan in place, given that you don't have an alternative sector where these people could go and where the opportunities are. And that's why this strategic growth plan is so critical, because what it does, it creates those opportunities and it creates a vibrant private sector that then can offer an alternative when it comes to taking some key and difficult decisions about whether or not, one, government needs to continue providing certain services, or you outsource those to the private sector, or looking through using the performance management system and saying, look, if people are not up to scratch, then unfortunately you've got to let them go to ensure that you have a smaller civil service that is effective, that is delivering. But without an alternative sector for them to go to, I appreciate it will be a very, very difficult decision for anyone within government to take, but also in terms of the economy of Montserrat, because what will happen? The individuals will leave, we further decline in terms of the population, which then makes Montserrat even less viable than it currently is. But
yeah, I know the Premier made this point quite eloquently. It just means that the support for Montserrat is switched from one government department to another, so that it's switched from DFID if these people go go to the UK. It's then switched to, I don't know, the Department of Work and Pensions in the UK. So it's not, we have to factor those, we have to factor in the timing. The strategic growth package, once agreed, will come on stream, and that will be the time to take radical decisions. Don't forget, Kato was suggesting there is a public forum on Little Bay development in the next week or two. One proposal from that, which sticks in my mind very vividly, is that the people who were proposing a high-end tourist development here said it would create around 750 new jobs. Just think of that, 750 new jobs. I don't know whether it's realistic, whether it would be half of that, but in the context of Montserrat, that is a phenomenal figure. Of course, at the moment, a lot of, if that were so, then more people would come from outside. Hopefully Montserratians would come back. This is the point, they will come back if there are job opportunities.
You used one critical word, the word that I was going to ask about, timing. Timing. Once you go to the Little Bay and high end and all of that, give me a sense, Kato, as to what are we talking about, what time are we talking about, and then bring me back to when we can get this performance thing going. Because for me, all I can think about is that warehouse down at Little Bay has been practically empty for the last 6 months or so. You go down there at any time and it's pretty much empty. I am aware that there's a quick passage through. So maybe you just simply miss when it's full and when it gets empty.
Efficiency.
Right. But the point is, though, that people are hurting.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for a time frame, not for the high-end thing when we're going to be employing 700 people, because that's 3 years.
Yes.
Exactly. 3 months, 6 months.
Okay, I think the issue on performance, I think I'll leave to the governor, but just to give you some idea, the governor alluded to the fact that next week we are planning a big discussion. I was just having a brief chat with him. That will include the Premier and will include John Cox, who is the lead consultant now working with the MDC in putting together the master planning process, following on from the charrette. Just to give you some quick milestones, and not to steal the thunder next week when we're going to have this very interactive debate with you and with the Montserrat in trying to just to bring you up to speed with what we're doing. Major milestones over the next 2 months is a master plan will be developed and fully costed by the end of March. That process is already underway. John Cox and a team of consultants are on island. And these are not real consultants in the way we understand them. These are people you met at the charrette. They're practitioners, been there, done that, developed these types of master plans before. So they're developing that master plan. Out of that master plan, for the very first time since 2007, when DFID started providing funding for the development of a master plan in Little Bay, we will have a prospectus. There have been ups and downs in trying to get a prospectus. We had GHK, that failed. We then had Collier's, and that failed. But this time around, in the next 2 months, we are definitely going to have a prospectus. Now, that prospectus will go out immediately to the private sector here in Montserrat, as well as other local investors who are interested, as well as internationally, for Montserrat to start gauging the level of interest in this new master plan, and in particular the outcome of the charrette, which excited many people on Montserrat in particular about what the future is going to look like. Immediately after that, we will then get, by June, some idea of the 3 concepts and the costing of the concepts for the port. Yeah? That work is already underway as we speak. I think there's a tender ongoing in terms of the design consultants. That's going to be finalized in the next couple of weeks. And then by June, we will get 3 different concepts. And on the basis of an updated economic assessment, together with the costs that come out of the master plan and the costs that will come out of these 3 concepts, and an assessment will be done to see whether or not this is a viable project for the British government to invest significant public funds at such a critical time. Once that is done, you'll then get more or less of a tentative decision from ministers saying, here's a go-ahead, continue finalizing the design of the port, and then the next key milestone is going to be the following March, when the final design will be done, and it will be a question of now getting the real hard numbers that will emerge from that final design that say the port is going to cost X. We already know the call in terms of public infrastructure in Little Bay will be Y. Add those two together and get a final decision from ministers that says this is the investment that will be required for Little Bay. But beyond that, just beyond Little Bay and Cars Bay, we're already moving ahead with finalizing our work on the economic assessment of the access, and we hope that in the next 3-4 months we'll get a decision on that. I think we've spoken at length about geothermal and what the next steps for that are, and I think we did so at the press conference last week with the DFID team. So we know that in the next 2-3 months we'll have some sort of finality on that, whether it's going private sector or fully public sector funded in terms of phase 1. And then in addition, we'll be looking at other areas as part of this strategic growth plan that may require, particularly because when you talk the strategic growth plan, you will need to provide additional support for the likes of beefing up the MDC. That is going to happen well before April because we need to have funding in place, a structure agreed, a revamped MDC, and the likes of John Cox who have ably delivered so far, leading the effort in particular on the land side. But not to forget our small private sector, we will now have a team in place for the very first time capable of providing the level of support that is required for the private sector in Montserrat to be ready for the investments that will be coming in. Because that was one of your questions when you talked about 700 jobs. Beyond the 700 jobs, there are all manner of ancillary services that Montserratians need to get ready for to provide on the geothermal, on access, on Little Bay, you name it. So I think a revamped MDC will help people think through how do I position myself for that opportunity once it arises. But at the same time, it doesn't stop people thinking ahead and asking as many questions as possible. And next week's foray is going to be a useful starting point to allow us to then get ready for these investments once they come. It would be a shame if for example, the port contract, you find that only 10 or 15% of the money allocated in that contract is, outsourced locally to Montserratians to deliver. What you want to maximize the impact of that investment locally is to increase the amount that is subcontracted locally.
Following up on what you said about the Charlotte Kato, has the government decided what plan or proposal particularly that came out of the Charlotte that they will be going forward with? Because I know you invited one team back as opposed to both.
Yeah, I think what was done is immediately after the Charlotte, the report that John Cox put together analyzed both proposals, Plan A and Plan B. And in the end, what we agreed was to pull out the best of what was in Plan A as well as the best of what is in Plan B. Now, that's all. Everything that is set there is not set in stone. The reason the team is on island for the next 2 months is to again review, talking to various stakeholders, and when the team comes back, different people within the team will come back. They're going to be talking to Montserratians on the ground to make sure that you concretize some of the discussions that happened at the charrette. And for example, the question of insurance cover, we've gone out already. We're doing a study. It's going to report in the next couple of days, as because this was a significant issue raised by some of the investors that may prohibit or inhibit their investments. And this is something that we are going to be addressing at the same time. So yes, the best of A and B have been selected. The master planning process is ongoing. There will be a public consultation, as with any master plan in Montserrat. The period is, I think, it's set out in the PPA legislation, but people will be consulted at length before this master plan is finalized.
I mean, the most specific decision, if you're not aware, is that the government decided that the port would be at Cars Bay, not at Little Bay. That's the decision. So that's what is being looked at in terms of the design now.
Okay. Governor Davis, the Royal Montserrat Police Force has had some assistance from Bermuda and the Cayman Islands in carrying out an internal investigation into misconduct. When will the findings be released?
The initial contract, or the contract is, they're supposed to be here for a period of 3 weeks. It could be shorter, so 3 weeks from last Friday. I would expect a full report to come to me shortly thereafter. I mean, I would stress that they are assisting the Montserrat police, that the investigation is being carried out in charge of the Deputy Commissioner of Police. But I think it's important that there is this independent viewpoint held to make sure that the investigation is transparent, and that if there have been wrongdoings, that those who have done it will be held accountable.
Okay. That is some change, though, as to what has been happening over the past several years, where we have had cases of police misconduct, but no one has ever taken the step to, invite other officers, as you said, an internal investigation.
I can't comment on what my predecessors have done or not done.
Let me just, that last question by my youthful colleague here kind of got my interest, and of course you answered by saying you're not responsible for that. But it was a strong accusation about misconduct within the police force before, because some of which I would have almost asked you to be specific about some of this misconduct. But I understand that there were 6 officers who came in from Bermuda.
Bermuda and Cayman.
And Cayman. I see, hence the 6, because I'm a little confused about 6.
Well, that's what, in terms of that was what was decided, particularly with the input of our independent police advisor, was necessary in terms of the volume of statements that they needed to review, the witnesses they needed to talk to, again, with Montserrat Police Force colleagues. So it may be shorter than 3 weeks, but there was some question about the numbers, right, to begin with. But that's what was decided as to be sensible in view of the volume of statements and correspondence that needed to be reviewed.
My information is that there may be more than the 2 people who have been either suspended or put on compulsory leave who might come in for scrutiny. Is there any truth to that in the preliminary investigations?
I don't want to talk about the preliminary investigations. I want to look at the completed report.
No. I'm asking if, from the information that is before you at the moment, could there be other people held liable for misconduct?
It is possible.
Thank you. To go back a little bit to you, Kato, as we prepare for the forum that you're planning to have, are you aware, because I think that would be important to know, I have not been able to find anybody who are prepared to come on board. In fact, they're so unprepared to come on board, they're actually negative and feel that nothing will happen or nothing will come out of the shadow. Is that the kind of feedback you get from anywhere?
I think you'll be surprised that next week when John is here, we actually tasked one of his team members to go about recording any expressions of interest locally in terms of people who are willing to actually invest in the Little Bay site. And the latest figure that I've had is about, so far, 30 million EC worth of potential projects and investments locally. So I'm not aware of that negativity with regard to the outcomes of the charrette. I think most of the feedback I've received, and I don't know about the governor, has all been positive. The reason we're having this discussion next week is just because we've had people saying, okay, we had the charrette at the end of last year, what has happened since then? A lot has happened since then. It's just that it hasn't happened out there. It's been mainly us, slogging away in-house to try and get a series of pieces of work underway that are critical for us to getting to a point where we produce a master plan and a prospectus and an investment strategy. So what we'll do next week is we'll have a more in-depth discussion. We can provide you with the evidence of what we are actually doing. And, I've got a whole work plan here, 6 or 7 pages of different pieces of work that we are coordinating, working on, together with Govenor Montserrat, to make sure that we hit the milestones, in particular the March deadline for a master plan and a prospectus. It is critical for the public out there to see a tangible outcome of the whole charrette and master planning process. That you will see at the end of March.
Can I just comment? I can understand why people might be cynical. I would encourage them not to be cynical. I know that all these things have been discussed in the past, and not that much has happened. I'm convinced that we're in a different situation now. I'm also, as you know, very keen on communication, because if you don't tell people what you're doing, then how are they supposed to know? And you get all sorts of wrong stories or wrong impressions. So very much welcome Kato's and the team's initiative to have this open forum, and we should make sure that people in Montserrat understand what is going on, and hopefully that it is different this time.
Thank you for that, because I was going to say, as far as I believe what you responded to is a little different from what I was really saying, but and I would just ask if do you think there's a possibility that, let us say that we might have spoken to the same people, that it's a matter of who they're speaking to, the observations that they make?
Yeah, in a society like this, a small society like this, you can't be 100% sure that what somebody tells you or tells me will definitely vary because of who they are talking to. But I would rather be more positive by thinking that, Little Bay, Cars Bay investment, everything we're talking about on the strategic growth plan is something that is bigger than you, myself, or any individual in Montserrat. And if we're looking at long-term development of the country, then we would want to get feedback that is not tailored because of who we're speaking to, but because it's in the interest of the development of the country. So I still believe the people who have given us feedback and have told us what they would want to do in Little Bay, I still believe that these are people who would be interested over the next 1 year to continuously talk to them and develop their projects, to the point that what you want to see is the diggers going in a particular area and starting, start construction of particular buildings in and around the site.
I'm aware of the work that was done regarding the people who've gone around and gathering the information. Yes. I myself spent a long time with them. I am a little concerned, and my reason for making the observation that I made a while ago is to ensure that you really get from the forums that are coming up the people who are interested and who are willing to promote the whole thing, and that people don't stay away even from that forum, because there's a tendency to believe among us as well confidentiality. I don't want to let you know what it is I'm interested in, not understanding that if I don't let you know what I'm interested in, we can end up doing the same thing and then we get nowhere. So I was making that to sort of prepare the way as to how you go about.
I can address that. I think one of the things we're doing when we beef up the capacity in the MDC, we are bringing in people who are professionals in undertaking these types of discussions, negotiations, and moving these types of projects forward. The number one issue, particularly the one that you raise, where people want that level of confidentiality, is critical in any development where, you find, for example, everybody would like to have a supermarket in Little Bay, but you may have to have discussions with 6 or 7 other people in order for you to then come back with whoever gives you the best offer, and that will benefit the MDC and government of Montserrat in the long term, is the person that will take that that option to develop a supermarket in Little Bay. And therefore confidentiality is going to be critical on how things are done, obviously above board, so everybody knows the process. An RFP process goes out, everybody gets an opportunity to respond to it, and then thereafter your negotiations are confidential with each of the respondents in order for you to better understand what the offer is, what's being offered in terms of the opportunity.
Budget talks. Anybody want to move on from that? Yeah, budget talks. I think I already mentioned and have already talked about it. My deep surprise at the position that your DFID team took towards the end of your budget talks. Other than the tax revenue that we fell short on, what were those other things, specific things, that was of concern to the team?
I think if you're looking at an overarching issue, it was the revenue one, and it was the revenue one for a number of reasons. When we did our media review, it was clear that Montserrat was moving on to a really good growth trajectory, which then meant, and moreover, you were coming to the peak season, which is November, December, January. You were expecting increased revenue outturn. However, the numbers we were presented initially with clearly didn't indicate that the economy had grown by 4%, and yet revenues had seemed to have fallen or not hit the targets as expected. So we spent most of our discussions trying to better understand what seems to have gone wrong there. Now, one of the issues that emerged was a question of compliance, but also there could be another issue where the records as we were presented with at that time may not have been up to date, which then meant that what we are waiting for this week before we finalize our budget and early next week when the FS is back is for them to revisit the numbers, and in particular the revenue estimates, outturn estimates, and then send us what they really think Government of Montserrat will have collected in terms of revenue outturn by the end of March. Now, the compliance issue is a critical one, and I don't know whether the Governor wants to say something about this, but it's a critical issue in particular when you look at the growth in sand mining, significant one, but then the revenue outturn doesn't match that growth significantly. You talk about the tax negotiator and that process which ended, I think, at the beginning of October or end of October. But since then, very little has been collected. So, it's well and good to undertake this process of negotiating and getting rid of all these old arrears in terms of tax arrears. However, there has to be a concerted effort to try and collect that revenue and to make sure that whoever's met the tax negotiator meets their obligations as they've agreed.
Fully endorse all that. The sand mining revenue issue is a complete anomaly, which I'm trying to follow up, and we'll try and get to the bottom of. On tax compliance, we now have a new director of the Montserrat Revenue and Customs Service, Mr. Frank Ferguson. He is keen to follow up this agenda energetically, and both myself and the Premier will do what we can to help him, because it is very much a shared objective.
You refer to him as what again? You said revenue.
He's director of the Montserrat Revenue and Customs Service, which was brought together last year.
Yeah.
Okay, you said customs. Does that have anything to do with the income tax, property tax?
It's revenue and customs. In that revenue, kind of revenue and customs, so tax and customs.
Yes, just highlights the problem.
As you mentioned about tax compliance as it relates to taxes and other issues, we're going to get back to the performance management issue in terms of built into the new plans would have to be some measure of protection for civil servants who want to enforce compliance but maybe getting other directives counter to that. I'm just thinking some of the issues here might be, in terms of the anomaly you're seeing, is the fact that they may have sent out those bills saying you owe us, but they were told to turn away, to not push it forward. So what sort of protection would be there for civil servants who are meeting this resistance because maybe higher up they've been given other instructions?
Well, that's a kind of hypothetical question.
Yes.
And as you know, I don't really answer hypothetical questions. All I can say is that in the case of sand mining figures, the discrepancy was so extraordinary. There may be good reasons for it, but I want to find out what the reasons are.
Okay.
So I'm kind of on the case on that. I would just reiterate that myself and the Premier and the government in general wants to, and he's been on the radio many times, wants to collect the revenue that is due to the government. So that's the overriding policy, and people shouldn't be in any doubt about that.
Does it make sense, though, to be so concerned about collecting taxes? And I'm going to give a date, because I think from, say, 2007 or to now, or from 2005 to now, yes, of course, we can counter that, but does it make sense to be struggling, or even fair at all, to be talking about tax arrears from pre those dates? Or to include that in what we can expect?
I mean, I think, from what I can remember from the report, he's talking about tax arrears from 2008 forward.
No, some of them go back to 1985.
But
then he discounted most of those,
yes, exactly.
Because the original tax bill was about 20 million, you see. When he went through his discussions, negotiations, he found that actually that's what the figure was on the books, but actually what was owing, because that was based on assessments, not on actual, numbers that people had submitted. He then found out that, the actual bill was about 8 million. So a significant portion of that 12 million had to be written off. No, it was 20 down to 8 million.
Yes.
So 12
I see 12 million. Yes.
12 million had to be written off. Yeah. And then he then had a series of discussions where they got rid of the interest element of it. So what you're left now is actually what people really owe. Now, when you ask the question of whether you should provide this blanket amnesty and write off anything beyond a certain date, it sets a precedent. And in Montserrat, from what we were told, and which is in the tax, the report, that no conviction or court case has ever, or a tax-related court case has ever been essentially taken to the courts here in Montserrat. Now, that sets a really, really, really bad precedent. When at a time when we're looking at increased growth, which would mean increased revenue for the companies that we have here, all that comes to naught when we talk about increased government revenue and moving Montserrat on to financial independence, if you cannot do anything about the compliance. And if you inculcate this culture where people expect that, we can do business but not pay taxes, and yet you have people, for example, in the public sector, who by default, those taxes are deducted from their salaries, is that fair?
But of course the policy the government has instituted is to have a tax compliance certificate to do business with the government. Yes. Yeah. And that is in force now. If you don't have a tax compliance certificate, you cannot do business with the government.
And to make this into a very fruitful discussion, I appreciate and I agree with all what you're saying. It can leave if the people understand this whole question of tax and the compliance and to put structures in place. So I can see us moving towards a situation where we will have not business as usual anymore as of today, and that I am understanding. I'm just wondering how many, for example, of the people who were owing taxes from 1985, let us say, use that figure, are here in Montserrat that we can collect that from. Has any analysis been done on that?
He did that analysis, but I don't have the report in front of me, and I think the person you could address that specific question to would be the FS, because he commissioned that report and he would have the relevant detail. But the report clearly sets out, that's how they had to discount part of the 12 million, given that some people had left the island, some people had died since then, and therefore it was impossible for them to actually ever collect on those sums that were outstanding.
And AG, Nerissa's question wasn't so much hypothetical. It's a matter of not wanting to, call names and be direct about who did this or who said that, but there was nothing hypothetical about what she was asking.
Well, my answer, and this will be the third time I've said it, is that the government's policy is to collect the tax that is due.
Regarding access, do you know of any plans that will be put in place to facilitate the hundreds of returning Montserratians in December?
You didn't specifically mention the ferry in your access thing. Do you want to just talk about the ferry, although it won't be relevant for the Christmas season?
Okay, I think the Access Coordinator's Office, as well as the Minister of Communication and Works, is very aware of this specific date. We are expecting a report from them as part of the budget negotiations for us to be able to finalize our commitment on access support, transport subsidies, support for the transport sector. And part of that includes them forecasting for this increased demand of, particularly in terms of the use of the ferry and the type of ferry service. So the report we're expecting on Friday will set out to us that this is the additional amount of money that will be required, in particular for that December-January period, where, with the 50th anniversary, you expect more and more people arriving on island. More long-term is we are finalizing the access economic assessment, as I mentioned, following which, over the next couple of months, we'll have to put a business case together, which is a standard DFID procedure, and then a decision will be taken at ministerial level as to whether you support investment in terms of the ferry as set out in the access strategy, or an investment on the air side of whatever nature that will be. And also a long-term decision on subsidies. But the ultimate aim of any intervention as part of the strategic growth plan in access is to move Montserrat, first of all, to ensure that we now, we stop talking about these access issues. It doesn't become an issue that is raised at every press conference, and it means that we have in place, both on the supply side, the equipment to deliver improved access, but also critically on the demand side, everybody in Montserrat and the government and the tourism board and everyone are doing what they need to do to create the demand that's required to put, sorry to use the expressions, bums on seats to ensure that you do not need an additional subsidy for that. Because you're not going to make an intervention in terms of significant capital spend and then expect to continue a subsidy long term. The idea is that the investment on access then precipitates a gradual reduction on a subsidy, given that we're doing all that we need to do on the demand side to ensure that we are filling the seats, both in the air and sea, and make the access viable, because that is critical.
So that's the direct link, one of the direct links between the strategic growth package and increasing financial independence for Montserrat.
And I noticed that the access coordinator has left. Is this because the access strategy has been completed, or?
That particular question can be directed immediately to the relevant ministry. However, my view on that, okay, I'm going to give my view on that, is that I think there was a delay in securing his services, and that he had to move on. Unfortunately, with Government of Montserrat and the relevant ministry has managed to secure Oro Martin, who was the interim access coordinator 2 years ago, before the current access coordinator, to come in and help move the access strategy along. Vincent Hippolyte will still be undertaking some work in Montserrat, particularly when it comes to the merge of the air and seaports. He's still going to be providing that support in terms of finishing off that bit of the work. And also, he will be, on a time-to-time basis, be providing support, particularly when it comes to the port development, because he has a lot of expertise when he was CEO of St. Lucia in terms of how that should develop. And, he will be called upon to help, move the access strategy along. So it's a loss in terms of a great resource, but on the other hand, we at least I have confidence in Oro Martin, who I've dealt with right at the beginning when I got involved in Montserrat back in 2009. And he was quite keen.
Can I just say peripherally in relation to access, and I should have mentioned it in my introduction, I was really pleased to see that the Methodist Conference for the Leeward Islands and the Americas were back in Montserrat after a period of 24 years. They last came here in 1988. 125 delegates came from around the Caribbean and the Leeward Islands, all hosted within the community, all the logistics dealt with admirably. They came to Government House yesterday for a reception. Everyone was extraordinarily cheerful. The Emerald Community Singers gave a particularly lively performance, but we got 125 bums on seats, as Kato said, for 2 weeks, and a really major event for Montserrat, which has been handled, in my view, extremely well.
Not going to take your hands away from the fire, Your Excellency. I noticed Kato very cleverly diverted something there to the ministry, but am I correct that the problem that maybe I should first ask, because maybe it's not irrelevant, is this a serious blow? I noticed we're still retaining some services of Mr. Hippolyte, but isn't that a significant blow to us to lose him at this time?
I mean, no one is irreplaceable.
The question I'm asking, is it a significant loss?
I think, the ministry have put in place a replacement who's not coming to this cold, who has done the work before. So I think they have done well to minimise the problems that there will be.
I am not going to drop the matter, Your Excellency. Why is it for 6 months we had a problem where we're losing somebody who's important to us?
You do have to ask the Ministry of Communications and Works.
Fair enough. Kato, back to you now. In terms of the revenue expenditure projections that our budget, the Montserrat budget team was putting forward, I note that your team said they will make those final commitments. Will we have this in time for our next for the budget, which comes by the end of March?
Indeed. I think given that the FS was away this week, we are hoping that by early next week we're going to have these numbers, and actually by Monday, and then we're also going to have a series of meetings within DFID to try and finalize that, and that's already in place in terms of meetings we're going to have early next week so we can finalize.
And once the aid memoir has been agreed with the government, it will be made public.
Yes, it will be. Yeah.
Is it fair for me to say that the British government, the UK government, HMG, is not really putting us, that we are not being placed in a position where we will actually beg you to agree to what we're doing?
Sorry, repeat that?
Well, no, I think I understand the question. There is no question of begging, demanding, or whatever. It is a mature discussion between the two sides.
Thank you. Any more questions? Or other questions? I would just like to say...
Can I just add something? We're
Yes.
development partners, so it's not a question of one party begging and the other one wielding the stick or anything. It's it's a good debate in terms of the discussions we have with Government Montserrat every year. And it's a question of, you want to spend this amount of money, can you justify it? And then on our part, we need to justify it back to UK taxpayers as to why you are funding a specific program. So it's in as much as they need to justify to you, Montserratians, locally, how they're spending, first of all, your tax dollars that they collect, as well as the amount of money provided by the UK government. We, on the other hand, have to justify any investment that is made in Montserrat, be it budgetary support, capital, or TC.
Who should I, and this is my final thing, and I almost, before I go to that, you mentioned that the prince and princess will arrive by boat.
Yes.
Could you, by boat?
Well,
like a ferry?
This is part, that would indeed be a boost, but that is not what is planned. They are actually steaming from Trinidad in HMS Fort Rosalie, RFA Fort Rosalie. So they're coming from Trinidad.
And on some nice special yacht.
No, on the
fleet auxiliary.
Fleet auxiliary.
On one of the ships.
Not the same one that was here last year, but a different one, but the same model.
And Mark, you're planning some real gala things for us, I suppose.
This visit of the ship is purely to transport the royal couple. So there's nothing that we are planning with the ship itself in terms of disaster management, capacity building or anything. It's here for a day. They're here to transport the royal couple.
And we'll be doing the normal things when the ships, I'm not sure which one it was, will come in their normal visits during the hurricane season.
Well, yes, RFA Argus will be with us next year because
this year, you mean?
The coming season, yeah. Fort Rosalie does not have a Royal Navy party aboard. It does not have a helicopter. It is purely a fleet auxiliary vessel on this occasion. So, in DM terms, it has no capacity to support us. But Argus will do, as Wave did in the last season.
I haven't actually read my release on the Royal Visit yet, but is it just for one day?
Yeah.
Or just 1 day?
12
Yeah.
12 hours?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand. 12 hours?
You can see a lot in 12 hours in Montserrat.
Yes, but how many people? I mean...
Oh, no, they will also mingle a lot. We are arranging a lot of public interaction, as indeed the royal couple want.
Particularly with young people.
Well, generally, yes.
Particularly with young people, so there's a lot of things, events will be arranged for that. Yes.
The
Finally,
program will be announced.
finally, you know, yesterday we did a workshop, all of us are here, with ECCD. And one of the questions we were asked in Montserrat by journalists from across the OECS region is, how do we do about information? Are we getting information on a timely basis on matters relating to policies and governments and so on? And one of my concerns is that whilst there is some little attempt to get information out, that there is no real good process or support for really getting information across to the public. And I'm wondering which department, who should I sit down and have a conversation with in terms of improving what happens about getting information?
I would have said the Government Information Unit might be your best port of call to start with.
And there is a
Well,
CTP.
because I happen to know the constraints and the problems they have within it. That's why I'm asking the question.
But then, if there are problems, collectively you need to try and sort them out. I mean, it's the Government Information Unit. It's their responsibility.
But you said Tanisha on the budget. Oh, okay.
Anyway, it's now.
Yes, it's now just 11 o'clock. So,
all right.
close.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending today's press conference. Hope you found it interesting and that we can get the information out to the public as Bennett so rightly says. Thank you very much and have a pleasant